Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to episode 15 of Crime Stories Sunday. Let me and Miss Cassie Springer let you into a little secret. It's not morning, it's not even Sunday. I'm recording this on Thursday evening. However, in this video, I've got quite a bit of footage to show you. So I thought it might be easier for me to have my computer with me so I know exactly which piece of footage I'm referring to. And I can't do that if I'm walking through a field. I'm sure you'll understand. This case is bizarre and horrific. It's a fairly recent case, and I'm going to take you to Knoxville, Tennessee. And on Saturday, November 26th, 2016, just 2 days after Thanksgiving, Joel Guy Sr., who was aged 61 at the time, and his wife Lisa, who was 55, were brutally murdered in the home. They were discovered by police officers who'd been sent to do a welfare check by Lisa's boss, who was concerned that the normally very diligent Lisa had not turned in for work. So the police turned up and they were met with an astonishingly horrific scene. Joel had been stabbed at least 42 times and Lisa at least 31. There are reasons why the medical examiner couldn't be more specific in that number, and we're going to get into that. So, what this case boils down to is money. The murderer wanted money. $500,000 of money, to be precise. This is one of the most grisly, utterly brutal cases that I've ever heard of. So this is a trigger warning that there are some graphic descriptions in this video. Are you ready? Joel Michael Guy Sr. was a pipeline engineering designer. Lisa Guy, his wife of 30 odd years, was a human resources accounts administrator. They had a comfortable life, really nice home in a quiet suburb of Knoxville. They had a boat in the garage, they had nice cars on the drive. Materially, they needed nothing. They wanted for nothing. But material goods aren't the be-all and end-all of a happy life. But according to Joel's daughters and friends of theirs, Joel and Lisa were incredibly happy. They'd been together 30-odd years. It was Joel's second marriage, and he had 3 daughters, Shandice, Angela, and Michelle, from his first marriage, but they'd split up when the girls were tiny. They'd known Lisa for that many years. They thought of her as a second mother and as a best friend. They spoke every single day in text message. Joel and Lisa were absolutely overjoyed when they welcomed their own son into the world, Joel Michael Guy. Joel Jr. So we'll call him Joel Jr. Although I think his friends and family knew him as Joel Michael. At the time of Joel Sr.'s and Lisa's murders, Joel Jr. was 28. Now the thing is, Joel Sr. and Lisa, they'd worked hard to accrue what they had. They were amazingly happy, as I said, and they wanted to retire. They'd planned this retirement out for several months. Joel's daughters knew about it. They thought it was a great idea. And Joel Sr. and Lisa had sold their house in Knoxville, and they were actually due to complete on it just a couple of weeks after their murders. They were due to complete on this house. And actually at the time of their murders, they were like that week, they were in the process of moving things out of their house to their new house. In their retirement, Joel wanted to move to his old family home in Seguinsville, which is in Hawkins County, East Tennessee. Yikes. So they'd already taken the boat, they'd taken a lot of their, personal effects, and one of Joel's daughters, who lived in the nearby Kingsport, nearby to Seguinsville, had been helping them move. In their retirement, though, they had decided that they were no longer going to bankroll Joel Jr. He was 28. He was a grown man. He hadn't worked a day in his life. According to one of his friends at his trial, he'd had some kind of internships while he was studying, but nothing permanent. But as growing up, Joel was a quiet, introverted child, and he was highly intelligent. So, such a shame that he wasn't able to utilise his academic prowess and go into a really good career. He was studying, he was doing classes, he'd been doing classes for years at Louisiana State University. As the absolute apple of his mother's eye, he wanted for nothing throughout his life. He'd been spoilt, right? And I think that's probably part of the problem. He was just lazy, and his mother was prepared to bankroll him, so he didn't take kindly to the prospect of no longer having his rent paid and his school fees paid and God knows what else paid. Joel Jr., introverted kid, and was described in adulthood as very secluded, very isolated. And at his trial, one of his previous roommates said that, he'd spend days at a time in his room and wouldn't come out. Was he suffering from depression? There was something going on. There was something going on with Joel Jr. But, the defence used it, actually, and said, look, his family never visited, he never took phone calls from his family. But the prosecution rightly said, look, that was Joel Jr.'s own choice. So, strange young man. Academically gifted, but very strange young man. But nothing would have predicted what was going to happen on the 26th of November 2016. Okay, so let's take you to Thanksgiving Day, the 24th of November 2016. Joel Jr. was also spending the week with his parents and his half-sister and his nephews. And Michelle noted at Joel Jr.'s trial that he was friendly, he was outgoing. He even came out of his room, which he didn't normally do, and was engaging her in conversation, following around. It was even making her feel a little bit nervous, that he was just following around, like chatty, just not like him really, to be honest. And so much so that he was even talking to the two boys, and they were quite young at the time, so he was clearing out some of his toys. His mother had kept everything, like all his childhood memorabilia, like sports trophies, report cards, and piles and piles and piles of toys. Growing up, Joel Jr. loved Beanie Babies, and he was even prepared to give his nephews his much cherished Beanie Babies, which Michelle thought was odd. But why would you worry, really? She just noted, she made a mental note that it was just a bit odd. But maybe he was trying to be the good brother and the good uncle, and it was Thanksgiving. Now we're going to fast forward 4 days to Monday the 28th of November. And this is when Lisa's boss, Jennifer Whitehead, was suspicious that Lisa hadn't turned in for work. As I said in the introduction, was not like Lisa. If she was sick, she'd ring in and let them know. Or if there was a family emergency, she wouldn't have left them in the lurch. She rang Lisa, She tried and tried and tried to get through to Lisa. No answer. So she did the only thing that she could do when, as a concerned friend and boss, was to call the police. So at first there was 2 Knox County Sheriff's deputies who turned up. Stephen Ballard and Jeremy McCord looked through the doors. They went round the side. They saw a doghouse in the backyard, so they were shouting for a dog, and nothing. One of the officers noted that there was no doorknob off the back door, so it was just a hole where the doorknob should have been. And he looked through and he couldn't see anything apart from some shopping that seemed to be in the hallway, like the foyer, as you come in from the front door from the opposite side of the house. There was some shopping on the floor, which he thought was strange. It just like bags and bags of shopping, like a Walmart shop, was just there on the floor. So he thought that was unusual. And they could feel the heat coming from the house, right? It was cold, it was winter, but this house was unusually hot, right? And there was a strange chemical smell as well. So they thought, this is weird, this is strange. We're going to see if we can get in, right? Because too many red flags. Okay, so in one of the cars on the driveway, one of the officers noticed that there was, one of those remote control garage openers. And hey presto, they opened the garage, walked through into the house.
I hear a dog howling.
And this is where things started to get very, very weird. So in the downstairs, they discovered a table with the guys' wallets and a sledgehammer on the table. This was like part of the kitchen area. And then another table in the kind of more formal dining room with a series of guns. They were all shooters. At Joel Jr.'s trial, one of the sisters said that Joel Sr. was a great shot with a weapon, and as was she. So he had the guns, they were there. But just note that they were there, right? But they weren't used in this crime. So sticking with the downstairs, again, like I said, incredibly hot and a strange smell. And the stove was on. And there was a cooking smell coming from this big pot on the stove. The officers didn't look into it, which is probably a good thing until forensics get here. So they started to go up the stairs and they could hear a dog. The guy's pet dog was barking and it was coming from an upstairs room. Turns out the poor devil was locked in the laundry room. So they had the guns out, they were concerned that there was an intruder. There was this shopping on the foyer. There was guns out. There was a hammer. It looked like things were in a certain amount of disarray. But then once they got upstairs, it turned into a hellhole. I can't describe it in any other way. These officers must not have been able to unsee the sight they saw as they ascended the stairs. They found what the forensics team called red-brown staining. It's actually blood. It got more as they went up the stairs. So there was clothes, there was blood spatter, pools of blood. There was one pool of blood on the upstairs hallway. And as they went down a corridor into Joel Sr.'s exercise room, it was like a small spare bedroom stroke exercise room, they saw a pair of hands lying on the floor. The thing is though, those hands were missing arms. Those hands were missing a body. Those hands were just lying there. According to the the testimony given at trial, one hand was kind of up like this, and the other was a clenched fist like this. The hand that was doing this was at the front of the hand that was doing this. It's just I've watched all the trial footage, and that just, I don't know, it stands out to me. Just stands out to me. Okay, so other items. They found sewer line cleaner, baking soda, liquid fire, kind of drain cleaner, muriatic acid, which is a strong form of hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is what we make in our stomachs, and it digests our food. But muriatic acid is strong, right? This can probably, given enough time, dissolve bones. Just really, really strong acid. Hydrogen peroxide, bleach sprayer. They knew they had to get out of there, and they left, and they called in the forensics. They had to get the specialists in to clear away all of this really strong acid. But the things that they discovered once the forensics got there were utterly terrifying. There was 2 blue, quite large totes. When they looked into these totes, there was body parts. There was actually, in one of the totes, there was body parts sticking over the edge of the tote. And when they opened that pot that had been cooking on the stove, they found a severed head cooking away. And it had been cooking away for 2 days, because this is where the investigation really began as to what had happened, what an horrific end Joel Sr. and Lisa Guy had really had, and who was responsible. Spoiler alert, it was their son, their spoilt son, who wanted for nothing in life. It was him. It was that guy. Joel Michael Guy Jr. The FBI, the Knox County Sheriff's Office, and East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office placed Joel Guy Jr. under surveillance for around 24 hours. They had his address, they knew where to look, and they finally apprehended him a day later on Tuesday the 29th of November as he was getting in his vehicle on Nicholson Drive, Baton Rouge, just outside his apartment there. When they searched his vehicle, they found a meat grinder in the trunk. Joel Michael Guy Jr. was promptly arrested. Joel Michael Guy Jr. pled not guilty. Nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me. I don't know why my parents have been brutalised and murdered in that way. Nothing to do with me. However, he edged his bets because he said he got his defence to file a motion that if he was found guilty at a jury trial, he wanted a very quick death. He wanted the death penalty and he wanted it to be quick. Didn't work out for him. That's another spoiler alert. It took 4 years to get to trial, but in October of 2020, the trial began, and we're going to go through in detail what happened to Joel Sr. and Lisa Guy. Joel Jr.'s defence, John Halstead and Jonathan Harwell, presented no evidence on his behalf. As I said, I've watched the trial, and they were lacklustre at best. They didn't have a leg to stand on. I mean, the evidence was overwhelming against Joel Michael Guy Jr. Overwhelming. The prosecution was led by Leslie Nacios and Hector Sanchez. Their evidence was outstanding, especially that of the medical examiner. She went into a lot of detail, and she left the jury absolutely no doubt what had happened in all its brutal detail, what had happened to Joel Guy Sr. and his wife Lisa. Oh, hello. We've got a friend. Come on. Come on then. Quick. So, let's get into how Joel Michael Guy Jr. did this. He attacked his father first, and it was in the exercise room. Hello. It was in the exercise room where the severed hands had been found. He'd just been stabbed. He was then declothed, and it looked like Joel Jr. had tried to, start the dismembering process, like there and then. It was just full of blood spatter up the wall. I mean, it was horrific. The scene showed evidence of a struggle, a massive struggle. There was torn blinds, the exercise machines were knocked over, and there was just knives and just horrible. Lisa, however, was out at the time. She was seen around 12:15 p.m. on Walmart surveillance, buying items that later, very soon after, would be in bags strewn in the foyer floor. And what it seems like is that when Lisa arrived home, she dropped the shopping in the foyer. She was attacked at the top of the stairs. Now, I don't know this, but I kind of get the feeling that Joel Michael was lying in wait for her, and he kind of said, Mom, I need you. And she just dropped the shopping and gone upstairs and just was attacked. The last face that you see on this earth is that of the son that you adored, that you doted on. That's the last face you see. Joel Sr.'s hands have been removed, as we've already seen, at the wrists and left nearby on the exercise room floor. I don't know why did he remove the hands? I don't understand why he removed the hands and left them there. And his mother's head, what was that about? What was that about? Why would you cook your mother's head? It had not just been severed, it had been broken off with force. Joel Guy Sr., his legs were like taken off right at the top of the hips, whereas Lisa Guy's only at the knees. And I wonder whether Lisa was smaller and he just wanted to dismember them to fit them in these toes. Did the hands and the head not fit? I don't know. I don't think we'll ever know. I said this one was brutal. The medical examiner couldn't say how many stab wounds there were. She couldn't possibly know because the bodies were so dissolved, right? There was no skin. It was in some parts of the bodies were down to the bone. This acid was really strong. These totes were like filled with this muriatic acid. But anyway, each of the torsos had a particularly large gash in it, and the medical examiner believed that was done purposefully to allow the chemicals inside the body to dissolve them faster. As I said, Joel Sr. fought back. He fought like a trooper. He fought for his life. And you could tell because there was a defensive wound on one of the severed hands where it looked like he'd grabbed the knife. And Joel Jr. had sustained some injuries. He'd had cuts to his own hands. He had a deep cut in his left thumb. And what a shame his mommy wasn't there to put a bandage on it. So what on earth was he to do? Well, what he did was he left the scene in complete disarray, and he was seen at approximately 3:30 p.m. at a Walmart obtaining bandages and ointment for his wounds. And then he drove home to Baton Rouge. He went to the student clinic to have his wounds treated. God knows what story he told them. And he drained what money he could get out of his parents' bank accounts. And then he was just going to wait to get a life insurance policy payout from his dead mother. These attacks were so frenzied So brutal. You would be forgiven, in thinking that this was a spur of the moment crime of passion type of double murder. But no. The jury heard that this was very planned. Very planned. He'd been planning this all month, or the all month of November. This was what was on his mind. Because this was when he was told that he was no longer going to be bankrolled by his mother, and he was going to have to be a big boy now, put his big boy pants on, and actually, get a job, pay his own rent, that kind of thing. The things that grown-ups have to do in life. But Joel Jr. didn't want to do that, did he? No. He thought he'd take the easy way out and just bludgeon to death his parents and dissolve their bodies. And then, I don't know, how was he going to clean up the scene? This is the worst planned murder I could think of. Like, he tried to wash away the blood, like there was this hose pipe that was kind of hung on the shower. But it was all over the floor. It was all up the walls. What was he going to do? Like, rub a bit of baking soda on it and vinegar and think, oh, there you go, that's done. Come on now, Joel. You're meant to be clever, son. Meant to be clever. You're not. You were badly planned. Badly planned. Dear me. So he'd been caught. He'd been caught on the surveillance camera at Walmart, but after the fact. But he'd been caught on various surveillance cameras in the month of November, buying the supplies that he'd later use to murder his parents. So he used cash at every transaction, thinking that was clever. He'd use the self-checkout, so he didn't have to speak to anybody. On the 7th of November, he purchased at Ace Hardware in Louisiana the muriatic acid, the hydrogen peroxide, and then on the 18th of November at Home Depot, he bought bleach sprayer, extension cords, a timer. So what they believed he was going to do, right, thinking that there's no way in the world you're going to be able to clean up this mess, he was going to torch the place. So he was going to set up some kind of, bomb, like explosive. I don't know. On 21st of November, this was when he was in Knoxville, he was caught on Walmart surveillance buying the plastic blue totes in which his parents, only 5 days later, entered into dead and dismembered. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. And they found him, now 32 years old, guilty of first-degree murder of both of his parents. The verdict was not unexpected. Jurors saw all of this medical evidence. They saw Joel Jr. emotionless when the autopsy photos were being shown in the court. Emotionless, just staring at the screen. Slight flicker, I think, of emotion when the medical examiner was talking about his mother. When it gets to his father, he's even seen turning to his attorney and, sharing a joke, smirking. What was that look? The jury saw all of that. They also saw, in Joel Guy Jr.'s own handwriting, a disturbingly detailed slaying plan, which the prosecution called the Book of Premeditation. It was 5 pages long, and it gave precise details on how to commit the slayings, how to dismember the bodies, how to dissolve the bones, and how much he would profit from his parents' deaths. It will all be mine, he says in one sentence. It's like some kind of evil comedic villain, except this is so very real. These I don't know another case. I don't know another case that's as horrible as this one. So Get killing knives. These are just examples. I'm just going to throw out a few examples here. Get killing knives. Multiple. Get sledgehammer to crush bones. Bring blender. What was he going to do with a blender? A food blender. What was he going to do? Meat grinder. That was still in his vehicle. He'd forgotten that. That was still in his vehicle. Bleach to denature proteins. Plastic bins for denaturation process. Does not matter where they're killed. Clearly not. Get rid of bloody spots to prevent evidence. Well, you didn't do a very good job, did you, Joel Jr.? Because you had so little panties. So little panties. My God. My God. Flush chunks down the toilet. Not garbage. Not the garbage. Not putting in the garbage, I guess. Get plastic sheeting for disposal process. And then he put something weird. He put, he's not alive to claim her half of the insurance money. All mine. $500,000. Flood the house, cover up forensic evidence, turn heater up high as it goes, speed decomposition, bleach reacts with luminol just like blood, douse area with bleach, big sprayer. I mean, just the ramblings of an insane, evil, spoilt brat. That's all I've got to say about Joel Jr., quite frankly. And the prosecution attorney, Sanchez, summed up perfectly. The guys wanted to retire and deserved to retire. The motive is pretty apparent in this case. Money. $500,000. That's what this case is about. He'd never done a day's work in his life. How did he think he was going to pull this off? You know, like we did a few weeks ago, we did Willie Picton. You know, the guy who was feeding people to his pigs. Now, he was chopping bodies up. He was getting rid of evidence, but he knew what to do. Right? It wasn't a big deal for him. He was a pig farmer. He had his own slaughtering place. He knew how to chop up meat. Joel Guy Jr. had never worked a day in his life, ever. Right? He could probably rustle up like a sandwich, maybe. But chopping up human bodies, those of his parents, not expecting to get blood everywhere or too much. You know, he's just going to clean it up with bleach sprayer. Come on now. Come on now, Joel. What were you thinking, son? Sanchez went on to say, he's used to having her, his mother, pay for everything and wasn't about to let them cut him off. He would rather see them dead than have that happen. So, he wasn't given the death penalty. I like to think that was the judge, like saying, yeah, you wanted to die. Well, sorry, no can do. Like Tennessee it's a death penalty state, isn't it? So, could have done, but no. Life in prison with no possibility of parole. So, he's going to rot in jail, but it seems he hasn't changed his ways because he doesn't like sharing a cell. And one of the letters that he wrote talks about wanting to gouge his celly's eyes out. Lastly, he hasn't, allegedly, given up all hope of receiving the insurance money. He still thinks he should get, as the rightful heir, the $500,000. Give it a minute, let that sink in. He's in prison with no possibility of parole forever. What does he think he's going to spend $500,000 on? I rest my case. I rest my case, Your Honour. So that concludes the horrific tale of Joel Guy Jr., the most spoilt brat and one of the most horrific murderers that I've ever heard of. At least in the ways that he dealt with And for such a materialistic gain, you're going to murder your parents. Fantastic. Only in Tennessee. On that note, I've been Michelle. I hope you're well. And this has turned out okay, doing this video in the comfort of my home rather than walking about in the woods getting rained on. I actually prefer walking about in the woods getting rained on, but I think we did okay, didn't we? So I shall see you, same place, not necessarily this place, same time, maybe, same time next week, 8 p.m. UK time for episode 16 of Crime Story Sunday. Don't know the case yet, but I've got some ideas. Bye, folks.